iHeartRadio presents Podversations, a weekly discussion with the biggest names and influencers in podcasting.
Hello and welcome back to the iHeartPodcast Speaker Series. I'm Will Pearson, president of iHeartPodcast. Always good to be with you. As you know, each week we get a chance to chat with one of our favorite producers or podcasters or thinkers in the space and talk about a show that we are just obsessed over right now. And so today we get a chance to do that. When I heard that we were going to be doing a podcast, or at least talking about a podcast with Billy Mann, longtime Grammy-nominated songwriter, record producer, creative executive. The guy has been involved in over 125 million albums sold. So it's just an unbelievable track record. I thought we might be going in one direction with the podcast. And I was thrown a curveball. And I'm so happy that I was thrown a curveball when we got a chance to understand what this podcast was all about. And it's called Yeah, I Fucked That Up. And we're allowed to say that on this show here. So we're going to get a chance to talk to Billy about that. But Billy, always good to see you. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Will. I'm excited. I'm excited that we can curse freely when we're recording.
We're adults, Billy. We can do whatever we want on this show. Now, that's the beauty of podcasting. So like I said, it was fun to see this concept because sometimes you expect one thing coming. And again, you've been involved in the music industry for a long time. I just love sitting down every once in a while looking at the roster of people that you've worked with, from Burt Bacharach to John Legend to Celine Dion to Cher, Backstreet Boys, Josh Groban. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And so I'm curious to hear from you. When you decided to start a podcast, what made you think to go in a pretty different direction with this?
Well, I think it's twofold. First, thanks for having me. Secondly, I think the experience being a record producer and a songwriter, the Captain Obvious response is I'm going to do a podcast about music. But so much of what you do when you're in the studio with artists, most of whom at this point in my career are celebrities, is creating a safe place for them to be themselves. And you want to capture that moment. And what people don't see, which I am lucky enough to see, is the more vulnerable moments that a lot of celebrities and artists have. And you just don't find celebrities who are constantly in a state of judgment allowed the room to brag about failure, but talk openly about failure, because every day that you're posting on social media, or you do an interview, or you're on tour, or you go to the store to buy milk, you are being judged and watched. And I have gotten to see a lot of famous people that are in my life in a very not famous way. And like all of us, they fuck up. They are making mistakes. They're trying to figure out how to navigate being human. And maybe they're navigating it in a car that's nicer than mine, or they've got clothing that's fancier, or they've got glam squads when they go out for date night. But in the end, they're doing the same thing that we're doing. And that was really the first piece of it. And I just thought it'd be interesting. And the second piece is really based on one of my kids who has learning differences and really suffered from terrible paralysis when he would fuck up on a test, or he made a mistake on something. And I kept trying to explain to him, if you want to be successful at anything, you're going to fail. You're going to fall down before you get to run. We first we crawl, and then we walk, and then we run, and then we fly. But you don't really think about that when you want to do everything right. And it's impossible to do that. And yet we are all living in a world, Will, where everybody is posting a highlight reel of everything, me included. And so, yeah, I fucked that up is like, the first question is, can I get enough celebrity style people willing to actually talk openly? I hope that at least the people listening to this understand that the motivation is not to have like a gotcha moment with somebody who's famous, but more to show just how relatable it all is for everybody. And it's a side that people don't see. And frankly, even people who aren't famous don't go into work and say, I really fucked up this morning with my partner or my friend or my kid, but we're all doing it. We're just not talking about it.
Yeah. Well, to that point, saying we're not talking about it, I loved hearing the comment from Kelly Rowland when she basically said, nobody's ever asked me this question before, and I thought that was just so bizarre. And did you find that in most of these interviews that you've been doing? Are you commonly getting that, like, you know what, I've not really had a chance to step back and talk about this before? Is that a pretty consistent thing?
Well, I think most celebrities and artists they're constantly in a state of promotion mode when they're out doing interviews, and nobody knows that better than iHeart. You get called, oh, this artist is in cycle, how do we coordinate them going on this show with this jingle ball or this function? So part of it is freeing them from an obligation to sell, and that's step one. And step two is trying to just use my record producer skills to create an environment for the conversation that is free of judgment, which is, I mean, we're all being judged all the time, but to prompt Kelly, someone like Kelly, who's been famous since she was a teenager, even someone like L.A. Reid, who's been reluctantly famous and then embraced the fact that he's a public person, it's an adjustment to talk about these things, because if you volunteer failure, we're already judged. Then it's like you're giving people, you're giving them ammunition to further bury you. And that's the misconception. So I think Kelly's view, even with Michael Bolton, was like surprisingly meaningful to me, because Michael is a guy who's been, I think he would say openly, someone who's been at the forefront of pop culture and also been in many respects marginalized, and someone that you would say, you'd make a joke about Michael, and he's had to endure all of that. But the behind the scenes of Michael's life, I mean, nobody knows that Michael Bolton lived on food stamps while he was raising his daughters. I mean, there are things that he talked about that were so meaningful to listen to that you don't think of someone like Michael Bolton's going to talk about these things. So hopefully when people listen to this, I think not only does it make us all feel a little bit more normal, but it also humanizes the celebrities that they know one way, and then they realize that they're also going through stuff or have been through stuff where they feel like they've fucked up. So,
and I'd never heard those stories. I was actually going to bring up the Michael Bolton conversation around some of those struggles, and the conversation that you guys had around the idea of taking yourself seriously. And a lot of times with people who are celebrities, we're often left with the impression that certain celebrities take themselves too seriously. And sometimes it's refreshing and sort of an interesting peek into somebody's mind, this idea that, again, some of these huge names still struggle with these same self-doubt, when these same things that are obstacles within themselves to success. But yeah, wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that conversation with Michael Bolton, and sort of how he's navigated that and found himself, where he is today.
I think part of it with Michael is he's gone through a series of cycles, right? I mean, there's just it for him. He was somebody that he didn't have his first hit song as an artist until he was in his 30s. And in today's world, everything is so young. It's like half of the pop stars are like, you would never, I don't say never, but we'd all be hard pressed to think the next big pop star is 30 something raising 3 daughters. I don't see, I want to say I see it, but I don't. And I don't think any of us, now it's like so-and-so is on this TV show and they're, a teenager, and all of a sudden our kids are dressing like whoever that is, or there's this worship. I think Michael, on the one hand, had an appreciation for this amazing opportunity that he had later, because he was singing jingles, right? And all of a sudden he listened to his first hit song on the radio, and right after he was singing like a Be All You Can Be Army commercial. And they had to decide between, is he going to be a pop singer and roll the dice, or is he going to take away the one steady income stream he's had to raise his kids? So I think part of his taking things so seriously, Will, is the fear of losing the opportunity for his girls. And it took a minute in our conversation to get to that, because I think when he was examining his own fuck ups, like what does he wish he maybe had done a better job doing? He wasn't thinking I should have done a better job with business. He wasn't thinking I should have cut my hair earlier or later. He wasn't talking about any of the sort of buzz pop stuff. He was really like, really looking at the time he maybe didn't get enough time with his daughters when he started to do well. And then he realizes now I can't get that time back. And it was very, I think we all go through that in some ways. You know, we're not just workaholics, but, you know, my mom worked 2 jobs when we were kids. And like, you know, I would, in the morning, if I got a note, have a good day with 3 boxes of cereal and a bowl, that was my mom's way of being a mom to me. But I think we're all trying to keep the balls rolling. And I think for him, his taking himself so seriously was, I think, born out of a fear of losing the opportunity and being back on food stamps.
Mm-hmm.
But
you know, it's interesting that we talked about, you know, sort of the view that we see, and you mentioned social media and the idea that we're projecting one thing, but having certain struggles that are happening behind the scenes. I guess to some extent, celebrities experience that to an amplified degree, this idea of a very public life and then what's going on in your real life. I thought it was a fascinating conversation when you talk about this idea of living a double life. And I was curious if you could, you know, talk about that, or maybe even some of the conversations that you had around this idea.
Well, I think if I made a general statement, my general statement was, I think I've discovered from doing this podcast that people generally have 3 lives. They have their public life, they have their private life, and they have their secret life. And I think all of us sort of go through life like outward facing. If you're selling something, you're on your job, you're playing a role. Hopefully you love it. And if you don't love it, you have to at least do your best to love it for what you can do for your family or yourself. And then your private life is like who you roll with when you get home and who you kick it with and watching your favorite sport or a movie or a podcast. And then your secret life is, you know, what we're struggling with or what we really love that maybe is a little weird. Getting through there is hard. And I had a conversation with Shelley Wright, who I don't know if people remember, but Shelley Wright in the 90s was the absolute like country music. Like she was everything. Kansas, farm raised Kansas girl, beautiful, play guitar, sing, wanted to go to Nashville and become a famous singer, whatever. And she did that. She went to Nashville and she got a deal. And her number 1 hit was a song called Single White Female. And Shelley was, she and Brad Paisley were like the royal couple of country music. And the night she won the ACM award for Best Female Artist. Now you have to remember, this is in the 90s. This is a Kansas farm girl, country singer, doughy-eyed, like just happy to be there. Like, oh my gosh, my dreams have come true. Brad Paisley's like her boyfriend. This is like the Jessica Simpson, Nick Lachey of country music, right? Minus the tuna fish. And all of a sudden, you know, she goes home, and the whole time Shelley Wright is a lesbian and tells no one, except she's in a gay relationship, and she knows or feels that if she tells her family, if she tells her record label, that her whole life is over. And talking to her was, I was breathless listening to her talk about, because her version of fucking up was really not being herself. And so much of the themes, not Shelley, that's one level of the double life. But I think what I've learned is everyone I've spoken to has their own micro version of it. Either they're not listening to what their inner voice is telling them to listen to do. It's like, I got this opportunity to do X, And inside you think, I don't know if I should do this. And on the outside, you do it anyway. And then when it doesn't work, your outside voice goes to your inside voice and says, why did you let me do it? And I think Shelley's story was, very powerful. But in other ways, you heard that from other guests. Like Evan Handler, people know from Californication and Sex and the City. He plays, Harry Goldblatt, Charlotte's husband in Sex and the City. And he's bald, right? And he's known as this bald guy who's a brilliant actor. But what people don't know is when you talk about his fuck ups, he has some career moments. And by the way, some hilarious moments about when he has done sex scenes. Like he has done sex scenes in Californication and Sex and the City that are completely like, I don't think if anybody listening to this has seen Evan Handler, in any of these shows, like he does these sex scenes where he's like naked and kind of like is masturbating and all kinds of stuff. And some of the conversation with him was so funny around that topic. But what people don't know is when we talk about I fucked that up or moments of self-doubt, the reason he's bald is because right on the eve of his Broadway career exploding, and he was in Neil Simon's 6 Degrees of Separation, he was diagnosed with a rare cancer, and he had a 10% chance of living, and this is as a young guy. So the reason that Evan Handler is bald is because his hair never grew back after he conquered cancer. So we see one thing in the celebrities, and they are all putting out there through social media and press and red carpets, all of their highlight reel moments. But I got to tell you, Will, I am learning so much listening to these famous people talk about these human moments, and it makes me love them more, and I also feel slightly more normal.
I would say for every conversation that I've heard, I think I've listened to 5 of the episodes so far, and in each one, these are people that I've heard interviewed in many cases dozens of times, and it feels like such a different approach here and a different kind of conversation, and I've loved that, and I assume that was part of the goal here is in terms of doing that. I'm curious, just in terms of the podcast format, why do this as a podcast? What is it about podcasting that you feel has helped this work in the way that it has?
I don't know another format where this would work. I think podcasting, and as someone that listens to a lot of podcasts, I don't think, there's a lot of podcasts that talk about this thing happened, what do I do now? Right. And there are a lot of podcasts that I don't want to say a lot. I don't want to, everybody has their own thing, just like there's a lot of songs and a lot of artists. But what I wanted to figure out was how am I going to get people who are famous or notable in a way to talk openly about their feelings, about failure, about falling down and being embarrassed. And podcasts, you can roll out of bed and be in your sweatpants in the studio, and I'm not worried about glam squads, and I'm not worried about people. It's all of a sudden there's a camera, and then there's all these other expectations. So I think podcast has been a really healthy platform where I can talk to people and they feel less judged than maybe they would on a talk show, a traditional talk show. And I think that has created a safe place for people to feel comfortable talking. I mean, think of how many Zooms you and I and everybody listening to this have been on when COVID and everything shifted in the world. And I think even in terms of today's political climate, people talking to one another is hard, ironically, given how the proliferation of podcasts and conversations and dialogues. And yet somehow when we talk about these more sensitive areas in us, there are few vehicles for this. And I don't know why, but I feel like this format is giving people a freedom to express and talk about their feelings in a way. And maybe it's because they're less judged than if they were on a talk show being grilled under bright lights.
I think so. There's, sometimes the word intimate is overused a bit, but when describing podcasts, but that's probably because it's really accurate. There's something about that connection, not only for the person being interviewed and the conversation that's happening there, but for the person sitting at home or the person on their jog or cooking dinner or whatever while they're listening, feeling right there in it. And you guys have nailed it already. A lot of times podcasts take a while to sort of hit that stride and in terms of capturing that. But each of the conversations that I've heard you have here just really showcase this incredible connection and a willingness for, the talent or the people that you're talking to be more vulnerable. And so I think you're bringing something that I hope is a benefit to people as they listen to it. And speaking of that, just in terms of helping other people, not fully related to the podcast, although you mentioned your kids earlier and the fact that you watch your kids struggle a little bit, and that might have provided some inspiration behind all of this. But we shouldn't go without talking about the work that you and your family have done to provide community support for families with special needs, whether they be kids or other family members. And one, just wanted to say thanks for all the work that you've done on that front. I know you have two kids that are on the autism spectrum, and I just think it's amazing the work you've done, as busy as you are in your professional life, to have taken the time that you guys have taken to really give back in every way you can. And I wanted to see if you could share the story. You talk a lot about everything that you've achieved, or you think about all the things that you've achieved, but the thing that you're most proud of is one of those moments where you get a chance to recognize what you've accomplished for a group that really needs it. Can you talk for a minute about the moment in the Oval Office and the opportunity that you got there?
Well, first off, thank you for acknowledging that. We're in the entertainment business where you find a lot of folks who are of means and get to a certain altitude and they do charity work, and then they have to name it after themselves. And it's like if your name is John Smith, it's like the John Smith wing of the, and I was raised to try to, I like the anonymous element of it. And and one of the things that happened when my oldest son has no expressive language. So look, it's 1 in 35 kids are being diagnosed on the autism spectrum. And it's a huge spectrum, by the way. There are, including my younger son is successful going to college, driving, loves music and building a life and his pace. And I would say to anybody listening to this, every journey is unique. But with my older son, who's now in his early 20s, there were very few resources and very few options. There was no health insurance coverage. There was, and it's a lot for anybody listening to this who's for sure knows somebody who has autism, a family member, a friend who has a kid. It can be a lot of unknown territory all at once. But where I got involved was more, I had such a upset reaction to the idea that there was no health insurance coverage for therapies for my son. And even though we could afford it, the way I grew up, we couldn't have afforded it. And so as I started to dig a little deeper, my wife and I, we just got active, and that led to getting involved in talking to politicians, really, because you have to move the needle, you have to talk to people. I've never been one that thought of myself in getting attached to politicians. And eventually that led to a relationship with President Obama long before he was President Obama, and he was Junior Senator Obama. And it's important to note that it's not, I've talked to everybody. I've spent time with Mitt Romney. I sat with Speaker Boehner. I'll talk to anybody. But I really managed to be a part of a lot of people and a lot of organizations collectively to put this front and center, and make it front and center, by the way, with George W. Bush, with Obama, and continuing forward. But when this authorization for funding, this is too long a story for anybody to listen to, but they invited me to go to the Oval Office for the signing into law. And I said that I wanted to go and bring my son, my son has a lot of behavioral challenges and doesn't have expressive language. So, but I felt like it was important that a person who's autistic, an individual, is there. And I wouldn't have done anything if it wasn't for my son. My son doesn't have the language to tell me things, but he had enough, he taught me enough to find some courage in myself to try and risk fucking up, in the, I fucked that up spirit of things, at least try. And so it was just when the president signed the bill into law for the funding and he gave the first pen to my son, it was better than any hit song, better than any award, any plaque that I've ever had. And in my house, I don't have any of my plaques. I'm grateful for all of them, but I don't have any of them in our main living space. The only thing I have is that pen on the wall. So I think I appreciate you asking me about it, because it's even that is like not easy to broadcast. And I was even told when he was first diagnosed, some people in the music industry said, you shouldn't let people know that you have a child with a disability, because you may not get work. They'll feel like you're distracted or not reliable. And that fucked me up for a while. And then thankfully I really turned the other corner, which is like, not only am I going to talk about it, but I want to do something about it. And just so you know, iHeart and Z100 were probably the beginning of that activism for me, the most powerful supporters of awareness, including one of the early Z100 jingle balls where they put the autism charities up on the big screen. And so I'm really grateful to iHeart and, Tom Pullman and Alyssa Pollock and Elvis Duran and all of the people in the organization that have always supported that part of my life. And it's important that I say that, whatever happens with the podcast, that has a lot more importance than that.
Well, I appreciate your saying that. And it's a no-brainer to get behind a mission like that. But have loved talking to you about this. I do hope if those watching or listening today, if you haven't checked it out, I fucked that up. There's so many great conversations. We've talked about a few of them today. Really think you'll enjoy the podcast. But Billy, thanks for taking some time with us. We enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thanks for the support. And hopefully I get better throughout the season, because I'm still learning and fucking up along the way. So I do appreciate it.
Oh, it's a lot of fun. Well, thanks for joining us today, and we'll be back with you next week. Take care.
Podversations is a production of iHeartRadio. You can find more from the biggest names in podcasting on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts.